I'd like to welcome Dr. Annie Huey for this presentation. Some background on this from my perspective. When I was doing my Ph.D. studies at Georgetown, I had a seminar with Dr. Dorothy Brown in American women's history. And so I wanted to do something on that topic. And I had always seen this essay on a monthly basis in the Catholic Passionist magazine, The Sign, on from about by Katherine Burton. And I decided that I would try to systematize and look through this. So I found it absolutely fascinating. And as we'll hear from Dr. Huey, Annie really took this to another level. I did a seminar paper, and when I met her at some history, American Catholic history meetings over the past couple of years, she expressed interest in this. So I gave her what I knew, and she, as I hope she'll tell us, uh, dealt with far more research through technology, really, that I was able to do. So this is an exciting topic about American Catholic women, and it's really a topic, in my opinion, that needs a lot more study. So Annie Huey here for this presentation is breaking ground and is offering for us in Passionist Identity a real voice that is key to understanding this publication, Sign Magazine. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Annie Huey, who will give us her presentation, and we look forward to it. When she's done, we'll have a chance for some Q&A. So Annie, please proceed forward, and we look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the wonderful introductions. I appreciate that. And thank you for asking me to be here too. I'm very excited always to talk about Katherine Burton. She is a wonderful figure to study. So let's jump right in. So this is a picture of Katherine Burton. I like this picture a lot because you can see she actually signed it. It says, with all good wishes, Katherine Burton. Whenever somebody signs something, I just think it's so I don't know, you get to feel like a personal connection with them in a different way. So I love that picture. And then this here is an example of her column. And I'll talk more about like the structure of her column in a little bit, but this is just an example. And you can see the heading kind of it that says woman to woman, that changes throughout time. This is my favorite one, the two women talking on the phone. I think that's very insightful into the time period and to what she's really doing. This column is really about connection, and it's about her talking to other women in a casual kind of way. So she really makes it very relational. All right, so why should Katherine be recovered? She really is this important untapped source of insight into the faith lives of U.S. Catholic women in the mid 20th century. The Sign magazine was one of the most popular Catholic periodicals of this time, the mid 20th century. And it sold so much, and her column was read throughout the whole country. We have evidence of, when readers would write into her, they were from everywhere. So she was very, very known at her time for this column, as well as she also wrote a bunch of biographies. She was known for both of those things. And so, since she was writing a lot for women, we can use what she was saying and how the women were responding to her as kind of a lens into how Catholic womanhood was being talked about during this time period. So the second point, how Catholicism and Catholic womanhood were understood and presented by a laywoman for her laywoman audience, and the ways in which Catholic women engaged in the woman question from the 1930s to 1960s. The woman question being, what is the role of women in society and in politics? So anything that have to do with that. And just very briefly, the findings that I have, it was really interesting to think about it. So Father Rob, he had me think about how Katherine really was in line with the Passionists. And it's really interesting to see that she very much was big on this. We have to bring Catholicism into the everyday life, into the people's lives, what was going on in the world at that time. all of Katherine's columns are all about that. She talks about current events. She talks about popular figures. She talks about books, movies, and she always puts a kind of the Catholic spin on it. So she's very much in the everyday lives of these people, which was a Passionist, which is one of the reasons that Sign magazine was created by the Passionists to begin with. She's also very global, and she becomes more of that as she writes, especially during the war, World War II. She really takes on a more global approach, which the Passionists also had a very global approach, and that's very evident in the Sign magazine too. So she really fits in with what the Sign magazine, what the Passionists were doing with the Sign. Other findings, specifically with Catholic womanhood, what I found with Katherine, again, that it's very much based on major world events. Also, her understanding of Catholic womanhood from the 30s to the 50s, we'll say, so for most of her time, was based on something called social housekeeping, which was the idea, there's other names for it, social housekeeping, or it could be yeah, not coming to me at the moment, but it's the idea that women should be more in charge of the public realm because of all their skills they learned in the domestic realm. So since they're such good nurturers, since they're such good at taking care of kids or easing conflicts or buying groceries, this is very common in, the progressive era women. So this is, early 1900s. This ideology was very present. And Katherine really holds on to that through her column in the 30s and 40s and 50s. We see a shift, and we'll talk about that here in a second, in the 60s. So her idea of Catholic womanhood, I mean, she wants the women to be active and in the public, but it's all based on this kind of gender essentialism idea that women should be out in public because they have all these innate nurturing kind of skills as women. So, there's limitations and, problematic in some ways. Let's see. But I do see her as kind of a proto-Catholic feminist because of the fact that she's using this ideology to kind of push women out into the public. And as we'll see, that shifts in the 60s when she moves away from the gender essentialism. So since very little is known about Katherine Burton, I just want to quickly go over some background information about her. So these two on this side, these are her parents. She has German ancestry. Both her parents have German ancestry. She was born in Cleveland. She was very well read, educated. She loved school. She loved to read. She read all the time. She got in trouble for reading too much. Her teacher told her mom, like, she's reading too much. You have to stop her from reading. So she's a reader. She's a reader, and a writer. She wrote so many poems in her high school yearbook. She has so many poems in there. So she was a writer and a reader from a very early age. She attended the College for Women of Western Reserve, which is now Case Western, and graduated in 1909. While she was there, she met Harry Payne Burton. He was a journalist in Cleveland at that time. So his family was also up in Cleveland. They got married a year after she graduated, and then they hopped around between Cleveland, New York, and Chicago for their first 10 years of marriage because Harry worked for different newspapers. So they're very much in this like journalism world. She helped Harry with some of his journalism. So writing is very much part of her whole life. They had 3 children, Wed, Pam, and Ron. The second 2 were born once the family was more established in New York. So after having these kind of journalism jobs, Harry became the editor of McCall's magazine. So huge deal. And they're living like a fine lifestyle. They moved to Garden City, New York. They had ponies, they had tennis courts. They were living a really highfalutin kind of life in New York. So as Harry and Katherine and their 3 children when they were all young at that time. And then starting in the late 1920s, Harry had mental health issues for a long, long time. But they kind of came to a head at this time, and he had a complete breakdown. He decided he needs to move out of the house and into an apartment in New York City. Katherine was devastated. I mean, in her autobiography, she just writes about how this just traumatized, the whole family. She tried to keep it together for the kids. She was holding it all herself, and it was just it was a horrible experience for her. Eventually, her and Harry separated. So Harry moved out of the house, and eventually they separated. And Katherine, who wasn't very religious before that, she then turned to religion as kind of something to support her. First, she was an Anglo-Catholic, so kind of very, very high Anglicanism. She was very high, and then she became a Roman Catholic. So Anglo-Catholic, then Roman Catholic. She read so much about Roman Catholicism. She had questions. She'd met with priests. She read all this Newman, John Henry Newman. She loved Newman. She read all this stuff. She debated with people, and she finally decided to convert to Roman Catholicism because she really liked the idea of the apostolic succession and this idea that the Roman Catholicism was like the primitive church that really drew her to it. So that picture, the very last picture, is Our Lady of Lourdes, and that is where she was baptized as a Roman Catholic. Immediately after that, she basically became part of the Catholic literati in New York City. So they're highly educated, well-read, upper middle class. So thinking Dorothy Day, she's friends with Dorothy Day. She's friends with some of the monsignors that are higher kind of class who are reading English periodicals. So that's who she immediately kind of surrounded herself by. And she also immediately pretty much started writing for Catholic periodicals as well, because she was a writer. And so that's what she did. And that's what she wanted to share, her faith and her experience and how much the Catholic Church kind of helped her over this horrible experience in her own life. So she started writing signs. So she was baptized in 1930, and she started writing her column, Woman to Woman, in 1933. So she was approached by Father Purcell, Harold Purcell, who was the editor of the Sign, and he asked her to write a column for women. And he chose the name Woman to Woman. Purcell founded the Sign in 1921 as a national Catholic monthly periodical, and he remained its editor until 1934. And as I said before, the Sign wanted to show the Catholic viewpoint in everyday life. So it's said to interpret from a Catholic viewpoint significant current events to offset in some measure the pernicious influences of the lurid secular press. So Sign was very much part of this bigger movement, this Catholic literary revival that was happening in the United States at this time. And so Sign was like that, and Katherine fit right into there. So they asked her to start writing. At first, there's questions of like, oh, should it be called something different? Should it be called something more inclusive? But Katherine always stuck with Woman to Woman. She said, I'm writing to women. If men want to read it, that's fine, but I'm writing this for women. And a lot of men we know did read it because of reading, like responses that she got. She got letters from men, priests, who would respond to her columns. Let's see. So these are some of examples of the different columns. So you'll see here, all of her columns are always one page. They were always one page. They were divided up into different sections. Sometimes the different sections were about completely different topics. So her earlier columns would be about maybe 7 different topics. As the time went on, she started to just focus on one topic, maybe breaking it down into different sections, but she would only focus on one topic. So it's interesting to kind of watch that change. And then you could also see all these kind of headings change too over time, with my favorite one in the middle still. So the women who read this were mostly, like I said, they're around the whole country, white, middle class, upper middle class women who could afford magazine and leisure time to read them. So kind of like Katherine, or slightly below economically and socially from her. And Katherine talked to these women about everything. I mean, this just gives you a tiny little sampling. But she talked to them about recent books, about movies, about speeches, about clothing styles, about food, about other kind of important happenings, magazine and newspaper articles. I mean, she talked about everything. A later editor of The Sign, Father Ralph Gorman, he wrote about Katherine that she wrote freely and fearlessly on a wide range of topics, and that she brought an intelligent and perceptive mind to the truths of her faith and their application to the life around her. So she was well read. She was in touch with the modern world. She regularly commented on stories she had read in vast array of news sources such as New York Times, the New York Herald Tribune, Commonweal, America, Ladies' Home Journal. I mean, she was just reading these all the time and responding to them in her column. And her columns were really dialogues. If she was not responding to an article or a story from a different news source, she was responding to a letter from one of her readers. And these letters ran the whole gamut. Some people loved Katherine. Some people did not love Katherine. You can actually see in this middle column here that I have up here, says Rebecca Still Storm Center. So she hated the very popular novel Rebecca at the time. And she probably has 3 or 4 columns of going back and forth with her, like her readers who would write in and say, this is a great book. And then she would respond to them. So it was very much this conversation that she was having with her readers. Some loved her, some did not love her, but Katherine was a strong-willed woman and she was not going to back down. So if she thought that her opinion was what the Catholic opinion was, then she stuck to it. Even if priests disagreed with her. She's like, that no, they don't know. Like this is actually what Catholic is. And so for her, Rebecca the novel was not a Catholic novel. Let's see. And The Sign welcomed all these conversations. They obviously were okay with the fact that people disagreed with her because they kept her from 1933 to 1969. She had this column. So I would imagine it's the longest running column of a woman in a Catholic periodical. And they had a very smooth relationship. I mean, she would call the Sign office in Union City, New Jersey, for the editor to accept the themes of her column. A couple days later, she would send her articles over, and she would even like mark the sections that could be removed if needed. And then there was very little back and forth. They really gave her the freedom and trusted her to make like smart decisions. And she felt like she was part of the Sign family. And she remained part of that family until she died. She died in 1969. So she died, while in the midst of writing articles still, or columns still. So that's a little bit about her columns, which is really the focus of what this talk is about her columns. Very briefly, she also wrote a ton of biographies of men and women, a lot of converts to Catholicism. Again, a lot of like people that were like her. So a lot of these like converts were like cultured. They were part of, high American society. So Sorrow Built a Bridge is about Rose Hawthorne, Nathaniel Hawthorne's daughter. Elizabeth Ann Seton, she was part of this, this kind of more cultured American family. So that was kind of her niche at the beginning. And then she also wrote histories of women religious communities as well. So she wrote a ton. So moving on to after she started writing her columns. So these are pictures of her 3 children, Wed, Pam, and Ron. Let's see. So they were either living with her or attending boarding school. Harry, that's her separated husband, he would send her money, but money always seemed to be an issue between them. Harry had many ups and downs with mental health. He was in and out of jobs because he had lost the job as editor at McCall's when he had all the his mental health kind of breakdowns. And he was distancing himself more and more from his children and Katherine Burton. Katherine remains very busy. She was part of the Bronxville Women's Club, so she was very busy with that. She also became a famed Catholic speaker. So she was writing, and she was also traveling and giving talks too. So this is her first kind of chunk of column. I broke it down into kind of world events that were happening. So 1933 to 1942. So this is her first section. Really a lot about the depression, economic issues. That was the focus. So this is really before, big US war, which is her next kind of big topic of columns. So here, the main idea in these columns is this idea as women as municipal mothers. That's the word I was looking for, municipal mothers and social housekeepers. So again, it's this idea that women believe that due to their maternal instincts, they would be able to they should get involved in government. So Katherine wanted them to be, so she wrote columns where she wanted them to share their opinions in their communities, both local and national. Women needed to talk about politics and social issues with their friends, insist that women be invited to conferences about social ills, especially regarding the family, to sign petitions together in legislative halls, and to insist on peace. So her columns really focused on that. And this is just one example column here. And it's the same kind of, it's the same idea. Let's see if I go back. Can I go back? Yeah. The women have run homes for so long that the state is just an extension of the home, that they should be able to also have more input into public conversations, basically. So that's one of her main things. And so she was pushing and encouraging women to go out into the public, to get their voices out there more. So even though it was based, like I said, on this gender essentialism, this idea that women are nurturers, it still was this step forward, a step pushing women out into the world. And then her next kind of section, we have 1943 to 1949. And this is when the war really dominated all of her columns. This is a picture of her son, Ron, who was in the war. And then this is a picture of letters she wrote to him all the time. Ron, he was entered the military in January 1943. He was part of the counterintelligence and signal intelligence branch. She wrote a lot of letters to him. At home, Katherine's daughter, Pam, she moved in with Katherine. Pam eventually would have 4 sons. So Katherine was living with 4 grandsons, and Pam's husband as well. They helped pay for the house. Katherine took care of all the grandkids, and she continued writing her column and her books, as well as traveling to give talks. So she was very busy, giving talks and traveling for research to write her biographies too. The main kind of crux of her column during this time was asking women to send charity kind of items to people abroad. So Ron sent her a letter, and he said in this letter, he saw the impoverished children in war-torn countries, and he asked Katherine to send packages for the needy children. So she sent packages to him, and then she showed the letter to some friends, and they sent packages to him. And then she included this letter in her column, and then her readers wanted to send packages over and money over. And that became a huge part of her writing. So she kept telling stories about the suffering around the world due to the war. And once Ron was out of the war in 1945, then she would connect people to different agencies. So she connected them with especially the National Catholic War Relief Services, and Eileen Egan. She became really good friends with Eileen Egan there. And so then people would start to send money to the National Catholic War Relief Services, and then they would send it or buy packages to send over, care packages to send over. So that was a big thing that she did during this time, and it's because, you know, she was informed about that through her son, and how the horrible things that children, especially children and women, were facing due to the war. So her column at this time, of course, was about the war. She also wrote about a ton of other things, though. I mean, she talked about Catholic books, comics, children's academic and spiritual education, child rearing practices, movies, women's higher education, support for contemplative practices, communism. So she talked about a bunch of stuff, but the war was really her main focus of this time. And again, we see the municipal motherhood present again. The Pope, Pope Pius XII, he wrote a document at this time where he also was encouraging women to get more involved in politics. And so she understood the Pope to be challenging women to be present everywhere where laws bearing on the worship of God, marriage, family, school, and the social order are proposed and discussed. So Katherine encouraged women once again to be writing petitions, be present at governmental peace talks, use their voting power to vote for peace. So she, as a lot of Catholics at this time, she supported the war because she saw World War II as this like evil versus good. And so she saw it as a theological, like, we have to do the war, but she also was very much big on saying, let's pray for peace. Let's donate, let's give all this charity to people who are suffering. So she very much wanted women, and she thought women being natural peace givers is what she would say, or peacemakers, because they gave life, because women give life. So they, of course, wouldn't want to kill, you know, to destroy life. So again, it's that gender essentialism, the municipal motherhood. She also, she encouraged women in their charitable work. So sending money, packages. She also praised work that women groups were doing. And she insisted that women follow Jesus's actions. So she became really big on saying, like, you got to follow Jesus. So Jesus instructed his followers to feed his lambs. And he was not specific as to which pasture they were in either. She also commended stories of people praying for peace, and she encouraged her readers to do so. So prayer, she was, you know, prayer was a hugely strong a way to combat the violence for her. And again, that women were primed for this work because of their experience and knowledge gained from motherhood. They know how to feed many people with little food. They know how to solve arguments between siblings, comfort little ones. The very act of birthing children into the world create natural desire to preserve life in women. So that's kind of what this here is talking about too. That women are able, because of their maternal instincts, they should be given a bigger voice. Again, step towards more of an equality approach that we'll see in the 1960s. Then we have 1950 to 1962. So what was she doing at that point? She was writing a ton still, and then she was happily enmeshed in her grandkids' lives. This is a picture of 3 of her grandchildren, her reading to them. So eventually in the 50s, her grandchildren did move out of the house, but she continued to see them, and they were a really big, huge part of her life still. And she really talked about them a lot in her column. During this time, Harry, her estranged husband, he died by suicide in 1952. He had been out of the family's life for a while. You know, he would pop in every once in a while. She was extremely prolific. She wrote her monthly column and published more biographies and histories, traveling, gave talks, helped with children's groups, religion classes came over for tea. She helped Girl Scout troops. Some of the column talked about the importance of women voting, different charities, and how her readers could donate to them. So she was still, from the war, she still really kind of emphasized the importance of women giving charity around the world. She became, like I said earlier, this global perspective. She wrote about television programs, her love of interior house painting, dieting, sleeping pills, Billy Graham, crime novels, the arts. Judaism, devotional practices. I mean, she wrote about all this stuff. Her main thing, and this is not surprising for the 1950s, her main theme of her columns was about this idea, this Kinder Kirche, or the children, the kitchen, and the church. So she was really big. She used this phrase in several of her columns at this time. And it makes sense in the 1950s, this domestic turn that was happening in the United States, as well as this religious turn that was happening in the United States. She kind of fell into that too. So she talked a lot about women's roles in raising children in the church. Interesting enough, the cooking one, she didn't talk a whole lot about giving specifics about what women should be doing in the kitchen. She didn't give recipes a lot, like maybe just a few. And she even wrote a column commenting on that, saying that, like, oh, some man wrote in about, how is this a woman's column? There's not enough recipes in it. And she's like, well, if that's an actual problem, basically saying it's not. But then she like gave a recipe. So she very rarely gave recipes or like specific like advice about like domestic kind of like housework. She really wanted women to work towards helping the like turn not interior. So during this time, right, there was more of an interior focus. She wanted women to be more exterior focused. So looking out and using again their maternal gifts, helping the children who are going to help the future world, or getting more involved in the church, being more active in the church. So she wanted all of those elements. Again, so one of her columns says, since men trusted women to oversee the three most important domains, namely children, home, and church, men should want women to bring their expertise on these subjects into the political arena. Again, the social housekeeping argument to push women into more public spheres. So again, it's essentialist. And like I said, she's really trying to push people to look more outside themselves. So not just within the house, not kind of closing in and being like, okay, this is just my little domestic family. Let's use these skills to look out into the larger world and into the future. So she wrote a ton about children. She was very devoted to youth. She was very concerned about youth, about what they read, about their education. So she wrote a lot about that. She also wrote about how children need to start charity work when they're young. Like I said, she did not often include recipes, but she made a big point of saying that domestic concerns were not lesser than. So there was a column where a man was making fun of women's columns, saying like, oh, they're just so surfacey, they're so stupid. And she's like, no, these issues are still important to women. Cooking is still important. Children are still important to women. So her 50s, I see her, and this is kind of what I have highlighted here. She stood up for women. She stood up for the women who are working their butts off day in, day out, raising the children, taking care of the house, getting involved, helping the church, running the church in a lot of ways. She wanted these women to be highlighted and to be honored. And a couple of mothers actually wrote to her and thanked her for being, a supporter of women, of young women and mothers, because not a lot of people were. So she stood up for them and said the work that they were doing was important. Taking care of kids, that's important. Feeding the family, that's important. And so she really emphasized that in her 1950s writings, especially. And in the 1950s, we also see, and this is interesting, is when she starts on the church, telling women they shouldn't just be decorating the altar, but they should also be able to talk to the priest about, for example, the mystical body. So she was complaining about, she had letters from women complaining like, oh, my priest, he won't talk to me about mystical body. And the priest then got a letter to Katherine and said, like, all these young college educated women, they think I have time to talk to them about mystical body. I'm busy with all this other stuff. And Katherine's like, well, you should let more lay people help you. So she really was promoting this lay, becoming more active in the church. So that was happening in the 1950s. So she was saying, and not just men, or not just women, but also men, saying that they should be able to help with the daily running of the church. The priest shouldn't be the one who has to do all of that, so that the priest then has time to talk to the people, the congregation, about the mystical body or other theological issues. So that started in the 1950s, and then we'll see that kind of transform into Vatican II conversation. So then this is her last period of her life, 1963 to 1969. And this is where we see that gender essentialism kind of fall away. And she starts talking about women needing to be in the public or have their voices heard because of their dignity, because of who they are as people. Here I have, this is her funeral card here, and you can see it's a quote from Cardinal Newman, huge Newman fan. I mentioned that earlier. This is a compilation of her woman-to-woman articles here on this side. So during this time period, she moved out of she had this house that she lived in New York, Bronxville, New York, for years. She moved into an apartment. Her number of biographies and histories decreased significantly. Her family was still in her life. Her children, they would visit her often, sometimes living with her. Her grandkids would visit her often too. Katherine would write letters to her family. Her travels slowed down significantly, but she was still reading. She was reading a ton of newspaper articles. She called herself an inveterate clipper of newspaper items, and her three biggest piles of clippings at this time were on the topics of laity, education, and counsel. So she followed Vatican II very closely. She wanted Catholic women to be involved. She seemed less concerned with the documents of the council and more with the spirit of Vatican II. She was introduced to the work of the early Catholic feminists, and she loved them. Mary Daly, Rosemary Lauer, Sally Cunning. And she passed these scholars' insights to her readers. So she wrote a lot about what these women were saying, and she passed it on to her readers. And during this time, she also became a board member of the U.S. section of the St. John's International Alliance, which was Catholic feminist organization. And again, the Sign magazine, they were also big proponents of Vatican II. And so they were happy that, that she was talking about these changes and one of these changes and introducing the women to all these ideas, especially these Catholic feminist ideas. She did unfortunately die April 1969. But I mean, she was writing, she went to her hospital in April 1969. She died in September 1969. So she was really writing up until April. And people wrote in missing her column. They wrote in to the Sign, and they were like, where is Katherine? Is she okay? We really miss her. Again, she's like a defender of young women. But then, yeah, she passed away in September 1969. So her main themes, as I've already kind of alluded, were that women needed to play a more active role in the church, not because they were natural caregivers, not because they had this like nurturing, ability or something like that, but because they were human beings. Her feminism really came from her Catholic faith. This is when there's a notable shift away from the social housekeeping as a reason behind women's active participation, moved to women as equals. And she used Catholicism as the reason. And she looked at, and this is based on the Catholic feminists who I mentioned earlier, Mary Daly, etc. She looked at their writing. So she loved the idea of turning back to the New Testament and other Christian documents and using those as the authentic teachings to Jesus, and using that as evidence that shows that Jesus loved women and treated them as equals, and that sexism only became part of the church in later centuries. That like the early fathers, they brought the sexism in. But if you go down to the primitive, Jesus, yes, of course, according to these early Catholic feminists. She also supported women deaconesses, servers, and she even alluded that she supported women priests. And yeah, and again, that it was the church fathers and theologians who brought sexism into the church. So going back and reading those documents, she encouraged all her women readers to do that and talk to them about that. And then the second part was emphasizing women's humanness. And she was able to show that the church recognized women as part of the human race and honored them in the dignity of their being and their human and Christian mission. And that intelligence and generosity belong equally to men and women. And she came to that through her Catholic faith. So she really is, I mean, feminism obviously was in the waters, but she came to it through her Catholic faith. And I think you can see it kind of through the 1930s, all the way up into the 1960s. You can see where it was going, and how she got there. And so in conclusion, again, the sign, Passionist, and Katherine Burton, they welcomed global concerns. And they also welcomed conversations about things that were hard and that were ugly, and they weren't going to shy away from ugliness and suffering of the world. And Catherine did. She wrote about everything. She was in line with the Passionists and the Signs Catholicism, integrated into the everyday life, everywhere, global. So, you know, she wrote about everything that was happening around her, and she really did encourage women to look beyond their own households, to look out, to look across the globe, to help other women, to see that there was a community of people who needed help. And she really tried to connect these women together. And that her Catholic womanhood was very much based on major world events, and it was very active. She wanted her women, again, to be exterior focused and to be very active. It was based on this gender essentialism at the beginning most of the time, but then you can see how it's kind of used, and it's how it shifts and how it's become more as women equal in dignity by the 1960s. But yeah, so that's the end of the kind of the presentation of how she was understanding and presenting Catholic womanhood to her readers through time. I know we're out of time, so, but I just wanted to quickly show you that this is these are some of my research adventures, the archives I went through. She's just unknown, so I had to like do a bunch of research to try to find her. Those binders are full of all of her columns. I've printed out all of her columns and read all of her columns. I read all of her biographies. And I read, so then I went, and this is her granddaughter, Elizabeth Burton. I went to Oregon and visited her, and she had a bunch of family letters. So I was able to read a bunch of family letters that have never been read before. So I was able to use those to create this kind of biography of Catherine. And I also took trips to New York and Bronxville, New York, which is where this is her house. This bottom right picture is her house. And then I went to Cleveland, where she grew up. And then I saw her, went to the graveyard. I saw her tombstone there when her, is what that has her son and her daughter noted on it too. And I think that's it.
Well, thank you very much, Annie. Very good presentation and graphic presentation with the images and the thematic aspect. I guess for the way in which you organized your presentation, out of the different segments, I'll start with one question, and maybe the Ryan and Keith, who are present here with us, if other people have other comments, they might add as well. But out of these different segments and these different time frames thematically, what was the one that really you found, given the way that she wrote in such a tight, thematic and really au courant approach? Which was the hardest or most challenging one for you to synthesize that that stretched you and caused you to come up with your own thinking process that you had to put all these different dynamics together out of these different frameworks. Which was the one that most caused the most mental anxiety and creativity for you?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's interesting. I would say the 1950s. I think that was the hardest one. Um, because the 40s, it was the war very clearly. 60s, Vatican II very clearly. The 30s, I mean, the 30s was kind of rough. But the 50s, I mean, it really was all over the place. So it took me a while to finally hit on this like children, church, kitchen, whatever idea that she repeated in like three of her columns at that time, which was unusual. And then realizing, oh wow, this is really all she talks about is these three topics in this at this time. But it wasn't as it's obviously not as kind of narrow as some of her other time periods. I mean, it was kind of broader. So yes, I would say that was the one that was the trickiest one for me to be able to synthesize.
Maybe do we have any questions that are coming in, Ryan or Keith?
Not yet, but if you
Not
have
yet.
any questions, you can post them in the chat window or use the raise hand feature. Or you should be able to just unmute yourself at this point.
So about maybe another point here, Annie, is you spent an excellent aspect of synthesizing these columns. Did you like reading her books, or did you find that type of writing? Explain that type of culture of writing. It's as I recall, there were no footnotes to it. It's a very unique Catholic genre. It's pietistic. Do you think did it come across that she was a woman of prayer through these books, or was she just how would you describe all these books, and did it make enough money for her?
Yeah. So her books and her column are written in a similar style. Like I said, she's very relational and very conversational too. So she really wanted to connect with her readers. And so, as you point out, she didn't have footnotes, she didn't have citations because she thought that that would weigh down the story. So she wrote in a fictional style. So she it was very much based on lots of research that she did, um, but she changed it and put it into a narrative and had dialogue that was sometimes made up, but she wanted to convey the truth of these people. She wanted to convey that, and she wanted them to be able to connect with her reader. So she thought these people, the people that she was writing the biographies about, their lives were so important and so uh, great at being able to lead others to the church. So like I said, a lot of these people, they were converts as well. And one of the reasons she started to write biographies is because she said during her own conversion experience that there weren't enough modern biographies that were interesting to read. And so she decided that she was going to write them to help other people who wanted to convert to the church. So she made them interesting. She made them, like I said, very conversational. She wanted the people, her readers, to be able to connect with the subjects and be able to see themselves in the subjects.
Okay. Any questions? Go ahead.
Dolores, I see you got your hand raised.
I do. I found it interesting. Well, the whole thing was so interesting that Catherine Graham's husband also had mental illness and committed suicide. It just, the parallel surprised me.
Yeah. I mean, it's very interesting. These strong women who have to pick up the pieces, and have to kind of push through it. It is amazing to read about them. Yeah.
Nancy?
Thank you. I've only read a portion and repeating
reading Faith is a Substance, which is one of her books based on Mother Theodore Guerin's coming from France and founding St. Mary of the Woods, which later became St. Mary of the Woods College. It started out as a school for children, boys and girls, and then became an institute, a female institute, and later a college. I was drawn to this book because I went to Mother Guerin High School here in the Chicago area and later went to the Woods, as we call it, the Woods for college. I would say knowing Mother Theodore's story before I read this book certainly made it more real in the sense that you've talked about, Anna, that even though her journals and other reminiscences and actual accounts are available, this was a very interesting book because it kind of, whether the narrative was real or imagined, it was things that you could imagine were in the thought or in the minds of Mother Theodore. It made it very approachable. It was very easy to read, sometimes maybe more childlike reading that you would give to a grammar school child, perhaps at a Sister of Providence school. But nonetheless, you would learn a lot about the trials and the travails of Mother Theodore. I would really enjoy reading other books that were of a similar foundation or beginning of a religious community, just to see if the style and the tone kind of resonates the same without being as familiar with the background. But I do enjoy knowing her story. And I think it speaks so much of Mother Theodore and her independence and her guts to come. For people or women here that don't know her story, briefly, Mother Theodore had very poor health and was told in France that if she did not take this challenge to found the American, we'll call it, institution for the Sisters of Providence, it would not happen. And so she had a lot of soul searching to do, as I'm sure Katherine did, through the times when her husband was, we'll say, less than perfect, and she had the challenges of her children and keeping her boat afloat, as they say. So it's been delightful to hear this background on this author. Certainly it was nowhere illuminated in the book or in the cover jacket. So it was fascinating to see how these two women persevered in times of when they could have easily just closed down their books or their doors and said, this is too much, and shut themselves away. They really moved themselves forward in moving other people forward as well. So I just want to say thank you. It was just a delightful experience, and I'm glad to have witnessed some of the sharing. I'll be certainly giving this information to my sibling, my sister, who's my last sibling that went to Mother Guerin High School, and to other Woods women that may have read this book in the past, even some of the sisters that are still my friends and living at home at the Mother House. So thank you so very much.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad that you enjoyed it. And yeah, I mean, I think that's what's really cool about a lot of Katherine's biographies. They're about these cool women, and she loved, I mean, she went and stayed at a lot of different convents, and she just thought the sisters were just awesome. And she told the stories. I mean, they all had harrowing, journeys, and they were so strong. And she highlighted that in so many of her biographies. And she was just so impressed. And I think she did. I think she connected with a lot of them in personal ways too, because of the trials that she herself had to go through.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think it's great. And all of her books are they're very similar style. So, I mean, yeah, that kind of the fictional, but at the same time, I read a lot of biographies written by other people about subjects. So for example, like Elizabeth Ann Seton, I read other biographies about Elizabeth Ann Seton, and Katherine was right on. I mean, she had all the things, she had all the stories. And it sounds like that's what happened too with Mother Gwen. Like, I think that she had all the things right. She just didn't cite it.
How about we do this, if you don't mind? If there's any people with questions, maybe we just hear the questions 2 to 3 questions. Just state the questions, and then we can end with a synoptic approach. Since Annie, you did so well dealing with all these years of columns, I'm sure you can handle a couple synoptic questions to clear all this up. But any 1, 2, or 3 questions? Anyone have quick questions? And then we'll let Annie end as a synoptic way and conclude it. Any questions that anyone would want to hear? Just a very short statement.
Just curious, like how it affected your life. You know,
That's
like
one.
doing all this research, like what did you take in and you know what I mean?
Okay, that's one question. We have maybe 2 more.
Did she ever have any like major pushback on some of the things that she was writing about? Obviously, I know like the people that are reading the magazine probably mostly agree with whatever they're reading in the magazine. That's why they're reading it. But just, for the time that she was writing in, the fact that she's a woman writing in that time period for a very popular magazine, just curious if she ever had any major pushback.
And thank you, Emily. One last question, and then we'll let Annie answer. Annie, how did this change your life? And the pushback that Emily mentioned. Again, I started by saying you found the family members and the letters that I could never, that when you told me that was amazing. But how did those 2 questions?
So I'll start with the did she receive any pushback? So she did, and her readers would write in and push back. Like I said about that Rebecca novel, I mean, they definitely disagreed with her about what she understood as what was a Catholic novel. About a lot of the different issues. I mean, but what's cool about Catherine is that she could have just ignored the letters that she was receiving, but instead she put them in her next column and she said, okay, I received this pushback on this. Like, let's talk about this. Like I said, she didn't back down. She wasn't going to back down. She very rarely changed her mind, but she welcomed confrontation. I mean, she liked a good confrontation, I think. So yeah, I mean, there was a lot of pushback, but like I said, I mean, the Passionists, they were down with it apparently because they kept her. I mean, and she did it in a respectful, she did it in a very respectful, intelligent, witty way. But yeah, I mean, she definitely received, and she received a lot of pushback about her biographies that she wrote too, especially about them not being scholarly enough. I mean, that was a big thing. But she received some critiques about the biographies, about the content as well. So that answers that one. And then how has it changed me? I think I love biographies, and I think that's why I love working on this biography about Catherine. And I love the fact that she also wrote biographies because I think she loved people too. She loved biographies and just the story of people's lives, and that you get to get into these lives and get to like know these people and feel connections. I think Catherine loved to feel connected with people and to their stories, and I think that's why she wrote biographies, and I think that's why she wrote her column the way she did. And I think that's I connect with her on that level for sure. Like I loved reading these family letters that I found and getting to know this person. I loved like I talked to her grandson often on the phone, and I'm so thankful he was able to tell me so much about Catherine that I never would have been able to know, because he knew her. He knew the way she looked. He knew the way she smelled. He knew, these things that I couldn't get any other way. And so she connected me with these other people and her granddaughter that I went out to visit and stayed with, and they were wonderful people. They wouldn't have been in my life, if I hadn't done this. And I think that's she's connected me with her family, but she's also connected me with all these people that she's written about. And that's what her main goal was. The title of my dissertation was like Arms Outstretched, is because Catherine had this vision of this Sacred Heart statue of Jesus with his arms outstretched, and that really struck her. And so this idea of like her reaching out and wanting everybody to be part of this community, part of this family. So I think that's what she did. She did that for me in writing this.
Annie, thank you very much. Everyone, thank you all for joining us tonight. We hope you enjoyed Annie's presentation as much as I did. So thank you again and enjoy the rest of your evening.
We don't have any more presentations planned at the moment, but we're always thinking about new possibilities. So perhaps in the next couple months, another one might emerge. So thank you, and thank you very much, Claire.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.